June 2025. While many countries are basking in the vibrant heat of summer, a once model relationship between two North American allies is quietly unraveling, not with a bang, but with the cold silence of a unilateral decision. Washington, the place that for years had been the first and only destination for Canada's natural gas, shut its doors. Not with a slam, but with a simple, resounding statement: they'll have to pay the tax. That's it. No negotiations. No high-level visits, no handshakes, no pledges to mend ties. Just one statement and one chilling message: America no longer needs Canada the way it once did. The official reason? Canada dared to impose a digital services tax that affected US tech giants. But anyone who has followed trade policy under Donald Trump knows that was just the surface. At its core, this was part of a long-term strategy, using tariffs as a geopolitical lever, forcing allies to choose: comply or be punished. For Canada, this tariff wasn't like past trade skirmishes. It struck at the heart: energy. For over 3 decades, Canada had depended almost entirely on its pipeline network to the US. Every year, more than $8 billion worth of gas flowed across the border. In other words, Canada produced and America distributed. Any policy shift in Washington meant shockwaves in Ottawa, and then those shockwaves truly hit. A 35% tariff package plus an extra 10% surcharge specifically targeting oil and gas sent Canada's entire energy sector into disarray. Many experts called it a shock, the biggest market crisis in 20 years. But while some were still scrambling to patch the cracks, on the other side of the Pacific, a quiet answer was already beginning to take shape. On a misty morning in Kitimat, a small coastal town in British Columbia, the vessel Gaslog Glasgow slowly pulled away from the dock, carrying over 170,000 cubic meters of liquefied natural gas, headed straight for Asia. No fanfare, no press conference, but for those in the know, it was a historic moment. For the first time in over 30 years, Canada didn't need the US to export its energy. It had found its path to the sea. That ship wasn't just a shipment of LNG, it was an unspoken declaration of independence, a full stop to an era in which Canada was locked into a single southbound pipeline. A new paragraph opening to a chapter where Canada steps into the world on its own terms. No one expected the breakup to happen this way. Not with arguments, not with summits, but with a ship cutting through the waves, quietly leaving port, turning toward promising new markets. And no one expected that the global energy map, long thought to be fixed, was about to be redrawn, all because of a decisive move by the so-called quiet giant of the North. From Kitimat, Canada's new horizon is beginning to emerge, no longer bound by pipelines dictated by geography and politics, but charting maritime routes to destinations across the globe. And to understand why that first voyage isn't just an economic step, but a strategic turning point, we must zoom out to see how the global energy map is shifting, and why the world is starting to speak Canada's name in a completely different tone. For decades, the name Canada was rarely mentioned as a global energy export powerhouse. Despite holding vast natural gas reserves, among the largest in the world, most of that treasure remained locked beneath the earth, like a vault never fully opened. The reason wasn't technology or ambition, but geography, and a strategic choice made long ago. Nearly all of Canada's gas supply was funneled through pipelines heading in one single direction, south to the United States. That relationship had once worked well. It brought stability. But that stability also came with dependence. When the US opened the gates, Canada exported. When the US tightened them, Canada had to wait. A model that seemed safe on the surface, but one that left an entire industry vulnerable and, above all, confined to a single market. Now that reality has changed. LNG Canada, a massive project first launched in 2018, is officially up and running. With an investment of 40 billion Canadian dollars, it's not only the largest private sector project in the country's history, but also a bold declaration. Canada is ready to play in the big leagues. In Kitimat, where mountains meet the ocean, LNG tankers can now set sail not into quiet pipelines, but across the Pacific, bound for some of the world's largest energy markets. This shift isn't just a technical way out, it's a strategic gateway. While US-led LNG ports must navigate the Panama Canal, expensive, risky, and tightly controlled, Kitimat offers a major advantage. From here, it takes less than 10 days to reach Northeast Asia. shorter, faster, cheaper, and most importantly, more autonomous. The significance of that becomes even clearer as the LNG market enters a period of major realignment. With Europe turning away from Russian gas, the Middle East steeped in uncertainty, and the US increasingly seen as an unpredictable partner under Trump, Asia, with booming economies like Japan, South Korea, and China, is hungry for stable, friendly, and transparent suppliers. And Canada, with its reputation for rule of law and environmental commitment, has suddenly emerged as a new anchor. That's why, even in its early stages, LNG Canada has drawn investment from Asian partners, not just as customers, but as shareholders. They're not simply buying into a trade deal. They're betting on a long-term future, on a responsible partnership model, and on a country that could become a central energy hub of the 21st century. The global LNG market is entering an era of unprecedented restructuring. And in this new map, a once remote stretch of British Columbia's coastline is becoming a strategic bridge between North America and Asia, between steady supply and rising demand. Canada, once seen as the silent supplier, is now viewed differently, as a proactive player with a voice and a path of its own. But this transformation reaches far beyond energy, because when a nation breaks free from the constraints of a pipeline and reaches the sea on its own ships, it's not just the flow of gas that shifts. The geopolitical balance starts to shift as well. Every LNG tanker doesn't just carry energy, it carries choice. And in a world where energy equals power, that choice is the key to reshaping the global game. Canada may appear to be just beginning its export journey, but in reality, it has already stepped onto the grand chessboard, where nations that once ruled through oil and gas must now take notice of a new challenger. Quiet, but resolute. As the first LNG ships departed from the port of Kitimat, the change wasn't limited to markets. It rippled across the geopolitical chessboard. Because in today's world, energy is no longer just a commodity, it's a form of power. Whoever controls energy controls relationships, and for as long as anyone can remember, the relationship between the US and Canada, especially in energy, has been held tightly by an invisible but resilient thread: dependence. But when Canada began exporting liquefied natural gas by sea, that thread quietly snapped. No drama, no collapse, but unmistakable. The geopolitical strength of LNG doesn't lie in volume or immediate value, but in its flexibility. With pipelines, Canada had one option: sell to the US or sell to no one. But with LNG tankers, every port becomes a potential destination. It's a small change in infrastructure, but a strategic leap. Because now, Ottawa no longer has to bow to Washington in energy negotiations. It can turn to Tokyo, Seoul, or Beijing. And in return, those nations are starting to view Canada differently, as a strategic partner, no longer bound by America's rules. That shift is even more powerful when you consider that Japan and South Korea, two of the world's largest LNG buyers, are not just customers, but shareholders in LNG Canada. This means the relationship between seller and buyer is no longer a fragile two-way transaction, but a deeply intertwined structure of shared interest where everyone has a stake in the project's success. In an increasingly uncertain world, that structure is the most effective shield against political blows. Moreover, in an era where tariffs are being weaponized and where a single tweet from the US president can rewrite the rules overnight, energy export autonomy is more than just an economic asset. It's a matter of national security. No need to posture like Russia. No need for military interventions like in the Middle East. Canada has chosen a different path, quietly stepping away from dependency and building control by mastering its own route to the sea. And on the flip side, the US now has no choice but to reevaluate its northern neighbor. Canada used to be a stable supplier, obedient, reliable, but easy to manage. Today, it's a quiet competitor with transportation advantages, clean supply, and a rock-solid strategic alliance with major Asian economies. It's no longer the gentle giant it once was. Of course, on the global stage, no one survives long on a single counterpunch. To go the distance, Canada needs more: a long-term vision and a development model that not only generates energy, but generates trust. Because in an age where the world no longer accepts a trade-off between growth and responsibility, between exports and the environment, geopolitical power no longer lies in quantity, but in how you do it. And here again, Canada is charting a different course. It's not chasing speed, It's not sacrificing communities for short-term gain. It has built an energy development model rooted in responsibility, trust, and consensus, not just between government and industry, but between companies and indigenous communities, the very people who live on the land where the gas is extracted and transported. The LNG ship may symbolize Canada's break from the US, but the Kitimat model, with its sustainable and transparent approach, is the true foundation for Canada's long-term influence. And as the world begins to ask, who will we buy our energy from? The answer won't just be about price, it'll be about reliability. And Canada is quietly but firmly building itself into a response the world cannot ignore. It's no coincidence that the first LNG ship departing from Kitimat has been hailed as a new symbol for sustainable development. Beneath the cold metal shell of those high-pressure gas tanks lies an entire value ecosystem, woven with a distinctly Canadian mindset. Not just exporting energy, but exporting trust, credibility, and harmony with both nature and people. From the moment LNG Canada was conceived, a pivotal decision was made to avoid using fossil fuels in the gas compression process. Instead, the entire system would run on renewable electricity, primarily from hydropower. This wasn't just a technical choice, it was an ethical statement. Clean energy must be produced cleanly. In an era where the carbon footprint is becoming a benchmark not just for environmental reputation, but for global competitiveness, Canada stepped ahead, with action, not just promises. And even more importantly, Indigenous communities in British Columbia, those who had long been excluded from previous resource projects, are now at the center of this development, not as those impacted, but as partners. Nearly $6 billion in agreements have been signed directly with Indigenous companies, councils, and organizations. They share in the profits. They own part of the Coastal GasLink pipeline. They have a say in every decision. This isn't window dressing, it's the foundation. The Haisla Nation, one of the first communities to support the project, didn't say yes just for money. They said yes because for the first time they were genuinely heard, treated as stewards of the land, not obstacles to be pushed aside. And something remarkable happened. When benefits are shared, when voices are respected, the resistance, long a shadow over every major energy project in Canada, nearly vanished. That's precisely what makes Asian buyers willing to sign long-term contracts with Canada, because they're not just buying gas, they're buying stability. They're buying trust. They're investing in an energy model where every molecule carries not conflict, coercion, or environmental fallout, but consent, transparency, and a spirit of harmony. Kitimat, then, is no longer just a place. It's a symbol of a new approach, where industry doesn't destroy community, where extraction doesn't clash with the environment, and where export doesn't divide. In a world fractured by the tensions between development and preservation, Canada's quiet model offers a path of reconciliation, where profit doesn't have to come at the cost of dignity or nature. But precisely because that model has succeeded, a bigger question now emerges. Can Canada scale it, sustain it, as it ventures further out into the high seas and faces harsher economic headwinds? Because the global LNG market demands more than cleanliness. It demands volume, speed, and relentless competitiveness. Major players from Qatar to the US, from Australia to Russia are ramping up. And while Canada's future looks promising, the challenges ahead are very real. Can a human-centered model like Kitimat withstand the brutal pace of this race? Can decency hold its ground? Or is it just a noble experiment in a market where price and power still rule the game? The answer will come, not just through export figures, but in how Canada navigates the challenges looming just beyond the horizon. Because setting sail is only the beginning. Staying the course, that's what will make this journey truly unforgettable. Setting sail is one thing. Steering steady through stormy seas, that's something else entirely. For Canada, the journey to bring LNG to the world doesn't end with the first ships docking in Asia. That was just the opening chapter. What lies ahead is a competition fiercer than any market the country has ever entered. In the Middle East, Qatar is doubling its LNG output, backed by cutting-edge facilities, low production costs, strong government support, and a long-established legacy in liquefied gas. In the Pacific, Australia is pouring billions into upgrading its export infrastructure. Across Africa, countries like Mozambique, Tanzania, and Egypt are emerging as new hotbeds, rich in untapped reserves and flush with massive investment deals. Even the US, once a customer, now a rival, is cementing its leading role with a dense network of export terminals and energy-friendly policies. In this arena, Canada, despite an impressive start, must face a hard truth. If it wants to stay in the game, it has to scale up. Phase 2 of the LNG Canada project, which would double capacity to 28 million tons annually, is currently awaiting approval. If it goes through, Canada could break into the world's top 5 LNG exporters. But that ambition comes with a harder question: how to grow without betraying the values that define the journey so far. Because the Kitimat model isn't known just for performance or engineering. It's known for transparency, for its trust building with indigenous communities, and for its commitment to development that doesn't sacrifice the environment. Scaling up puts pressure on all those pillars. How do you earn the trust of more indigenous communities? How do you keep the supply chain clean and transparent as demand skyrockets? And how do you protect the nation's image in a world that's growing ever more critical of emissions and climate responsibility? And then there's the looming challenge of carbon taxes. With the EU and Japan preparing to implement carbon border adjustments, tariffs on imports based on the emissions involved in their production, even LNG, long seen as cleaner than coal and oil, is no longer immune. If Canada can't prove that its gas is not just lower carbon, but measurably clean, traceable, and tightly controlled, it could lose its edge. And notably, even developing nations, once considered lenient, are now introducing similar standards, forcing suppliers to adapt or be pushed out. Beyond technical and policy hurdles, Canada's biggest challenge may come from the very expectations it has created. When a country chooses to do the right thing and succeeds because of it, the world expects it to keep doing the right thing. No missteps allowed, no delays forgiven, no compromises accepted. And those expectations, if not matched with solid institutional, financial, and human capacity, can become a burden rather than a motivator. That's why Canada's LNG story at this moment feels like a ship newly launched, carrying hope, trust, and a set of maps still being drawn. Along this journey, there are undercurrents everywhere, from price wars and shifting global rules to internal pressures. But if Canada can navigate them all and stay true to its sustainable identity amid market winds, then what it gains won't just be measured in output or profit. It will be in its ability to redefine what energy power means in the 21st century. And at that point, the world won't just see Canada as a new supplier of natural gas. It will see a blueprint, a nation small in population but large in principle, stepping into the global arena without losing its soul. But all of that depends on one question Canada must answer for itself. How far are they willing to go to remain who they are? Sometimes history isn't written in grand battles or glittering treaties signed beneath the flash of cameras. Sometimes it begins with a single ship, a quiet decision, a timely pivot, just enough to alter the course of an entire nation. For Canada, LNG isn't just a new export commodity, it's a strategic choice, a declaration of how the country wants to exist in an unpredictable world, not with loud rhetoric, but with steady steps, not with lofty promises, but with transparent action and enduring values. From being a nation almost entirely dependent on pipelines flowing south, Canada has carved out a brand new route, straight to the Pacific, straight to Asia's largest energy markets. Not by tearing down the old order, but by building a new one, fairer, cleaner, and more humane. Not in haste, not with noise, but with resolve. And that's why the world has started to look at Canada differently, not just as a supplier, but as an anchor. In an era when trust feels more fragile than ever, as superpowers lose consistency in both strategy and ethics, Canada's approach, efficient yet inclusive, stands out like a different kind of wind. People aren't just asking how much LNG Canada can sell, they're asking how Canada is doing it, how it listens to Indigenous voices, how it pairs environmental responsibility with economic benefit, how it refuses to sacrifice core values just to climb a global leaderboard. And so the final question isn't what has Canada achieved? It's how far can Canada go? Can it maintain that identity in an increasingly brutal marketplace? Can it scale without watering down the spirit of Kitimat, once hailed as a symbol of harmony between industry and community? And perhaps most importantly, can it inspire other nations to not just grow, but grow responsibly? In today's world, tangled in climate crises, geopolitical tensions, and supply chain shocks, nations that keep their word and stay true to themselves are rare treasures. Canada could become a model for the 21st century if it keeps choosing the harder path, to grow slowly but surely, to stay principled without being rigid, to stay flexible without surrendering standards. A path that may not shine with immediate glory, but could lead to a position more solid than any superpowers. And if that happens, Canada's story won't just be about energy, it'll be about integrity, about choosing the road less convenient, but more just, about a country once called quiet, now speaking out in its own way. Not shouting, not grandstanding, but making the world pause and listen. What do you think of the path Canada is taking? Can it hold on to this trust in a world constantly in flux? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's share perspectives on a story that, while distant on the map, carries lessons that hit close to home for every nation and for the future we all share. And if you find value in reflections like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep exploring the silent shifts in economics, geopolitics, and the forces quietly reshaping our global order, because sometimes it's the quietest stories that spark the biggest changes.